Welcome everybody to episode 24 of the Never Board of Trade podcast. I'm Jaipaul.
I'm Vijay.
And we're here to talk about all things happening in Brampton and our takes and what we think it all means for our community.
Yes, and our next episode will be a live podcast.
Yes, I like that you're working the promo in right from the beginning. Yes, exactly. So let it not be overlooked that this is our last foreseeable in studio. After this, we're doing a much larger event on the 25th.
That's right.
25th podcast.
24th.
On the 24th of March.
Yes,
that's right. But yeah, so for this episode, we had a couple ideas of things we want to talk about. Yeah. Typically, there's a lot more going on in the news. Not that there's a lack of things happening in the news. Yeah. Typically, there's a lot more happening in the news that directly impacts Brampton.
Yes.
We've had budgets, we've had big announcements, we've had things happening that have allowed us to be a little more reactive. But we were talking before the podcast about what we want to talk about today. Yeah. And I think we realized that a lot of things are still forming. And that perhaps a little bit of a different format today, let's still have some structure to it. But instead of talking about what's going on in Brampton, kind of what seems to be congealing globally, provincially, regionally, that we want to start thinking about investigating, the types of questions we want to ask, and some of the ideas it's provoking about where we're going perhaps in the next couple of months.
Yeah, I think the nature of the news in the past week or so has been very meta and existential and philosophical sometimes. But and so I like this format of let's dig into not necessarily the details and our takes per se, but what are the questions we want to ask? What do we want to explore? What are we looking forward to? There are a few things I'm thinking about.
And give the listeners some reassurance, quite frankly, that we're on a couple of these topics. They're not lost on us. We're still at the stage where we're figuring things out. But in some cases, actually already have some events and interesting conversations very soon arising where we're going to be talking about some of these issues in depth as well with people who are a little more knowledgeable than us. So I'm really looking forward to where we take this conversation.
For sure.
So as a bit of a structure, we were talking about maybe going globally and working our way down. So we want to talk a little bit about Canada's place in the world and what does the Carney Doctrine start to look like now. We want to take a little bit of a conversation around interprovincial trade and what's happening domestically within economic development within Canada. Regionally, we've talked a lot about the impacts of changes at the province and what they mean municipally when we're talking about the city budget. But we're starting to understand that there might be some implications at the regional level as well. And then finally, some issues close to home as it pertains to safety, security, things of that nature, and some of the upcoming events and conversations that we're going to be having about how Brampton's developing.
For sure.
So those are our four big topics today.
That sounds great.
All right. So let's start off with the big one, the Carney Doctrine, our global place in the world. You're the one with the economics and political science background, so I'm going to let you kick it off. What are we talking about here? And the reason I bring it up is to say we use the term Carney Doctrine kind of loosely. And Carney Doctrine, I think, once upon a time, had a very clear definition prior to him entering politics. And I think since he's become Prime Minister, what the Carney Doctrine even means has become something of some speculation. It's forming, it's not formed. So I thought, let's tap into your brain, because you can provide some historical context for what that looks like. And then maybe that gives us some jumping off points on what that means in terms of current events.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the Carney Doctrine really kind of is informed by that big Davos speech. And he used a ton of terms in that speech. It's funny, Minister Anand, we were at an event, Tiara bought an event, and she joked that it was like a highly jargonistic.
I think the term she used literally said he used a lot of big words. I think she specifically said that.
Variable geometry and all of that. So I think we can zero in on some of those specific terms, but I think overall what that speech lays out is an abandonment of this status quo that was put forward by the Bretton Woods institution. This idea that the U.S. is the major global hegemon, Pax Americana. This idea that these institutions really hinge on the economic power of the U.S. and that's what gives these institutions legitimacy. And as a result, the agenda, therefore, was the embrace of a rules-based trading order where there's free trade, free-flowing commerce, underwritten by American military and economic might, if you will. What Carney laid out in that Davos speech was this realization that system is no longer relevant, and the United States has shown itself to be a little bit of a agent of chaos, a sort of wild card, and middle powers like Canada therefore must embrace this new sort of this new posture of being self-interested in some ways, and that involves maybe shifting alliances depending on the specific issue at play. So we see this with, for example, the China strategy that was laid out just maybe a few months ago, that seemed to contradict are the decades of automotive industrial policy that we've been pursuing with the United States. Just a few weeks after that, we saw our automotive strategy, which really seemed to sort of build up our domestic capacity for automotive. Then we see the India deals that have been struck, and the desire to put forward a free trade agreement by the end of the year, and especially considering that just a few years ago, just maybe last year, there was a bit of a diplomatic sort of
tension, yeah.
And so all of these, and then on top of all of that, then you see sort of Canada embracing the U.S. in their attack on Iran. Yeah. So all of these individually seem incoherent with one another. And it doesn't seem like it's part of a larger strategy. It seems like Canada's sort of oscillating between various sort of alliances. The reality is, I view the Carney Doctrine as admitting that each one of these issues has a different benefit to Canada, and they might seem incoherent, but only because for so long Canada has embraced this overall sort of meta goal of maintaining the rules-based trading system underwritten by American legitimacy, but each one of these issues sort of can be adjudicated in and of themselves.
Sure.
So yeah, that's sort of my take on the Carney Doctrine. I'm still making my mind up about it.
Yeah.
I mean, when asked, for example, about Canada's position on Iran, Minister Anand said that this was informed by our values, and our values include nuclear non-proliferation for Iran, and this belief that the regime is a bad actor and working on a nuclear weapon. And I don't know necessarily that I fully buy that. I mean, I think part of it might be the fact that diaspora politics is important. I think some of it is trying to get the Iranian vote. I think another piece of this as well might be that because Canada also produces oil, there is kind of a short-term vested interest in ensuring that there is instability and volatility in the price of oil. I'm not exactly sure what I'm kind of conspiratorial here, but I think I'm still making up my mind about the specific sort of applications of the Carney Doctrine. Yeah. But I think in general, I agree with this idea that middle powers need to operate in sort of this new Hobbesian kind of context of looking out for themselves.
So because there's nothing I enjoy more than semantics.
Okay.
Does this, taking everything you're saying at face value, which I agree with,
yes,
these inconsistencies and incongruent aspects of how we've approached our relationships with other powers and other countries, does that constitute a doctrine? And therefore, because my context for that word is grounded historically. I think of things like the Truman Doctrine, right? There's a clear understanding of what the U.S. policy was at the end of World War II around containment of the Soviet Union, and that drove everything from their monetary policy to how they engaged militarily with the rest of the world to, quite frankly, what they developed in terms of internal industrial policy. It was all-encompassing. I know I'm being a little bit nitpicky here, but to me the term doctrine suggests a manifesto almost that allows us to understand not just how we're reacting in the moment, but to understand where we're going. The challenge I find right now, and I'm not being critical of any of the individual decisions that the Prime Minister's office is taking. Yeah. We can litigate all of them if we want.
Yeah.
It's more so a conversation to say, hey, look, if it's a doctrine, if it's a point of view, if it's a philosophy, I should be able to predict and foresee where we're going. And it feels like right now we're responding, if not being reactive, to what's going on in the world.
It's an interesting point. Does the absence of a doctrine constitute a doctrine?
Yeah.
and that's essentially what this is.
Doctrine light.
It's essentially my critique of the Carney Doctrine, so to speak, is that it's essentially saying Westphalian states can act in their own self-interest. That's kind of self-evident to some degree. To the extent that I think there is actually a strategy, maybe not a doctrine, but a strategy, is this embrace of capital in addition to the trade of goods and services. And in particular, in the India example, accompanying the Prime Minister were executives from major financial institutions, banks, pension funds, representing about $600 billion in market capitalization. And there were agreements to sort of liberalize the trade of capital between the two countries.
Yes.
And I think that's a very interesting piece because I don't know that, at least as long as I've been aware, that trade really encompassed in this really sort of substantive way the flow of dollars in the same way that it does under this Prime Minister.
Right.
So I think in that way there is a clear sort of approach. What I would say is where I lack clarity is what do we mean by values when we say these decisions are informed by values.
And this is the part where I struggle a little bit. So let's go back to this idea of a doctrine hypothetically being something that's a little more fully baked and consistent and clear as to what the principles are that underpin it and undergird it. What you're describing right now as it pertains to the flow of capital, that's been consistent with how Carney has approached all things, even philosophically before becoming Prime Minister. This idea that private money and private enterprise and investment can be harnessed for public good is something that he's been consistent about even before taking office. And I think what we're seeing now is the ultimate manifestation of that, now that he has the power to enact that policy at a much grander scale. But when we talk about that values piece, something that's been consistent with the Prime Minister prior to him becoming Prime Minister in all his conversation is commitment to sustainability in the environment, for instance. And that's something that has completely disappeared from any of the policy work that's being done right now by the federal government. So again, when you talk about these value pieces, I just point out to say, not only is it difficult to figure out what values we're talking about, but those values that in the past he has championed are values that he no longer sees as being important to focus on. And there's a certain almost like situational ethics that I fear is sort of creeping into what we're doing here now. And again, I'm not criticizing any one of these decisions. I think a trade deal with India has a lot of potential. And in particular for a community like a Brampton, with our huge diaspora community, I'm super excited by this. I'm really thrilled that we are exploring relationships beyond the United States. I'm thrilled that we are becoming the leaders among the middle powers that he's describing in terms of developing economic strategy globally and building new relationships with Europe. This is all good stuff. So I'm not being critical of the decisions. I'm just worried that if we're making these decisions on a moment-to-moment basis, are we actually operating while at the same time trying to say we're operating from values? Is that congruent? Because that to me feels like there's a little bit of a misstep there. Can you say you're operating from a place of values if you're reacting situation to situation?
No, I'm inclined to say no, you can't. Especially when we kind of layer on the domestic piece to this, right? I think, so you mentioned the environment. Let's talk about the environment for a moment. There have been strides made in the relationship with Alberta, Canada's relationship with Alberta, in inching closer to this pipeline that Danielle Smith wants to create. Right? There have been one of the first actions by this government was to repeal the carbon pricing, carbon tax that Trudeau was famous for.
You got to, he basically won the election on that. He disarming Poilievre by saying he was committing to doing that during the election period.
Yes. But the other piece of this too, when it comes to environmentalism, is the Green New Deal was once a prevalent piece of industrial policy that folks like Jeffrey Sachs and Naomi Klein and a few others have talked about. And I felt that someone like Carney, someone with his sort of vernacular, would embrace an industrial policy approach to environmentalism, if the carbon pricing mechanism was politically unpopular.
Yeah.
I don't really see a lot of that. I see an embrace of the oil and gas, a doubling down of oil and gas. And when we think about getting renewables, for example, to the point where they can actually compete, or at least be part of the energy mix with fossil fuels, we have to actually utilize government policy and the strength of the government to incentivize the market to do so.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a lot that the government can do. We need to be investing in storage of energy to be able to get that vision of the future, and then that's to say nothing of nuclear, right?
Yeah.
So I think he's left a little bit on the table when it comes to that piece, right? And I'm not exactly sure what the values are there. Another example of this is on immigration, the India deal as an example. There have been major announcements around establishing centers of excellence and providing scholarships to Indian students, right? Full 100% scholarships for research positions at universities in Canada, and it's sort of like, okay, that's great, but then you're also cutting the number of students that we're accepting into the country, which fair, fine, I get it. You're also removing, you're also diminishing healthcare for asylum seekers, and you're asking them to copay. It's sort of like there's this domestic political angle that doesn't seem consistent with the messaging outside of Canada.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I'm articulating myself well, but it's sort of, to me, it doesn't. I can't see the strategy here.
Yeah, and this is my fundamental concern, and I'm not picking on using the term doctrine. It is the term that's being utilized broadly, and that's why I'm getting caught up in these semantics. Because to me, it implies what you're expressing a frustration in that you're not seeing, and that's a cohesive strategy where our domestic policy and our international policy should be complementary and enmeshed with one another. And that the investments that we're making are clear where we're seeing those payoffs. And I'm willing to give a little bit of a benefit of the doubt because I understand things are dynamic and moving very quickly.
Yes.
And this Prime Minister has been in office for less than a year and has not been, it's not the extension of existing policy. Even though this is a continuation of Liberal government, this particular Liberal government is a complete departure from that which was under Trudeau's leadership. So I'm willing to give some slack here in terms of, I don't expect everything to be fully articulated today, but I am concerned that we're not seeing clear direction. So anyway, I just share this piece in the exact ways you're describing. And these pieces in India is an interesting one because the economic side of it and the investment side of it and the flow of capital is great. The notion of trying to therefore prioritize human capital within that as well and knowledge transfer, create opportunities, enhance our universities through doing so. Again, all makes sense. But to your point, we're living in a community right now that's going through a crisis in many ways to our post-secondary institutions, to the livability of this community that's driven by a failure of immigration policy primarily targeting international students. We have not cleaned up that mess yet, and yet are moving on to framing what a new relationship looks like without addressing the fact that there are communities like Brampton, and there are many others in Ontario and Canada that have a number of international students here for whom the system has failed, and who are now here without the capacity to continue their education, but not an easy way to go back home, or who have come here hoping to translate that education into the opportunity to work, knowing that they're not going to get the permanent residency they need. And so these challenges, I hope, become part of this strategy as they're addressing it. But to move on and say simply, we're just going to bring in the best and brightest from India to be researchers and PhDs at the University of Toronto and McGill and others. That's great, but we have to be looking after the messes that have already been created.
And I agree that there's an obligation to look after the messes that we've created, but there's also there's a sort of fundamental incongruency here of what I see, the messaging I see in India and outside of Canada isn't the same messaging I see within Canada. It's this idea that the Prime Minister was very complimentary of Indian students, as an example.
Yeah.
Yet, our society in Canada right now is in this
a real
really
tension.
awkward moment
Yeah.
where there's a lot of animus towards these individuals. So it almost feels like a little bit. And again, to your point, very new government, less than a year.
Yeah.
It will, I guess, be revealed in time what the strategy is here. But it almost feels like there are two different governments: the one outside of Canada and the one domestically. Right. And I'm trying to square this.
No, I totally agree. And so we have some interesting conversations coming up. So I don't like using the podcast for shameless plugs, but as it happens, we're doing some interesting programming around some of these topics. So next week, on the 17th, we have Minister David J. McGuinty, the Minister of Defense, will be here in Brampton to talk about, quite frankly, the defense strategy that's been released in the last 2 weeks.
And this is a big one, partly because this is by far the largest line item in the budget, and perhaps the most we've ever spent on defense ever.
It absolutely is. Outside of wartime, there's no one's debating that piece at all. And I think, quite frankly, I think it's something we're going to be talking about a lot coming up later this year, because not only is it a huge opportunity potentially to mobilize industry with those federal resources around defense, but the implication, as you and I are starting to get some senses of, is that the federal commitment to defense spending may come at the expense of transfers to the provincial level, and therefore impacting services in other areas.
That's right.
No one is saying this definitively, but if we start to see some of the
austerity
measures that are being taken by the province,
OSAP,
the implication is that the provincial governments are preparing to receive less money from the federal government. Why? Because we're spending the money on defense. We don't know this to be sure yet, but I think this is something to talk about.
For sure.
Which is a long way of saying, when we have Minister McGuinty here next week, this is among the things I want to talk to him about.
Totally.
Is we're going to have him to an opportunity to some podium remarks and to do a bit of a fireside chat, an opportunity for us to ask some questions. And the number one question I do want to ask is where are these dollars coming from? And what are these dollars coming at the expense of?
This is it.
And so this to me is the number one question. How are we going to maximize this investment to ensure it actually ends up in the hands of businesses who can drive the economy forward? But what are we giving up to do so?
Yeah.
Do you have another question you'd want to ask? Like, what's your big question for McGuinty?
This is exactly it. And I think what we're seeing is the reduction of the architecture and infrastructure of immigration, as an example. It will now become it'll be a lot harder for asylum seekers to access healthcare, as an example, as I mentioned, among other things. And also this doctrine, if you will, of balancing the operational budget and investing in the capital budget, so to speak. What does that mean in real terms? I think that's a very good question.
And just to make that really clear for people who are listening, because I assume this is where you're going with this, among the implications of that, when we talk, it's easy to say, I just want to make sure people are keeping pace when you're saying capital budget versus operational budget. We're seeing a record reduction in the public service, for instance. So massive layoffs happening in Ottawa right now. And so how are we balancing out our capacity, as one example, how are we balancing out our capacity to deliver on these giant projects when at the same time we're cutting the civil service? Is one of those examples of the tension between capital versus operation, just to keep people sort of in the loop here.
Absolutely. And then the implication as well is, to what extent will the capital investment result in in-house expertise versus the private sector?
Are we more reliant now on industry experts telling government how best to spend those defense dollars, for instance?
And then my other piece for Minister McGuinty is to what extent is our defense investment? So it kind of relates to what are we giving up, but we have a number of priorities in that we're advocating for that increases our capacity to be productive, and that increases our sort of the job creation piece and all of that, but they're not explicitly they're not typical sort of investment strategies. Public transit, as an example, right? Building out the infrastructure to make that happen, sort of building out our capacity for, and we're going to talk about this, interprovincial trade, right? To what extent is this part of the larger strategy? And it seems like it is, but to our earlier points, I mean, we're seeing a lot around defense, and we're seeing a lot around our relationship with other countries. It almost feels like the internal economy conversation has been stalled for the last few months.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a good time to transition to this.
I think this is the exact time to transition, because this has been my biggest frustration with this current federal government is when Prime Minister Carney was elected, there was sort of, the clear mandate was response to the tariff situation. He was the person to lead Canada in response to Donald Trump, and that meant a bunch of things, which included what our strategy and approach was going to be toward tariff. It was going to be around with the U.S. It was going to be a conversation around establishing relationships and diversifying our economic opportunities in other parts of the world, so globalization. And it was going to be about addressing trade barriers and domestic policy so that we can mobilize industry more easily and capitalize on what was already in place here in Canada. There was this understanding that there was a bunch of low-hanging fruit that was, in terms of economic opportunity, that we were just not taking advantage of as Canadians because of red tape and bureaucracy that didn't need to be there. And so if these are sort of like the three big ideas that Carney was elected on, that first one, that tariff one, is proving to be a little more intractable, but we'll see where we're going, because the negotiations and so forth are coming up. We've had some wins, we've had some challenges. Globally, I think, as we've already touched on, things are happening. We've seen trade deals starting to be articulated with China, with India. He's in Japan. He did a minerals deal with Australia last week. We can judge these deals on their merits, but nevertheless, if he was elected to create diversification, that is happening, and the government is spending in that way. But this last one, which everyone seemed to believe was the easiest one, because it doesn't require permission or partnership from any other government to do. And every premier stood up and said, let's shatter these interprovincial trade barriers. We're talking a year later, and I hear crickets. And I feel at this point, quite frankly, that both levels of government are avoiding talking about it because they failed to deliver on it. This thing that every Board of Trade and Chamber of Commerce will tell you, we've been advocating for decades. Finally, both levels of government are saying we want to address, and here we are a year later, and we still can't figure out how to ship product from one side of this country to the other without it being encumbered financially or through bureaucracy.
It was also the most soul-stirring part of his platform too. It's this 100%. Idea that we can give more. We can bind together.
We can band together as Canadians.
Exactly. And I think with the interprovincial trade piece, because there are some organizations that have indicated that it was sort of overstated, right? Our inability to trade with one another is a bit overstated, and it's mostly, if I'm being completely honest, centered around Quebec and some of the language requirements and all of that. There's some things around alcohol and some standardization
and logistics standardization as well. There's some stuff in the trucking and logistics industry, to be fair as well. But you're right. A lot of it is Quebec centered.
That's right. That being said, I think an addendum to this interprovincial trade piece is the nation building projects, and the list of projects that have come out under this nation building imperative. They're projects that are more or less, within a yard or two of the end zone. Like they're very close to being complete anyway. What's the real legacy policy of the Carney government? And again, it's a young government, sure, but what's the domestic industrial strategy here? That's the real question for me. I'd love to see some more building out of our. Of the sort of a second generation, third generation of the superclusters program. How are we building out our own industrial or domestic food supply chain? How are we building out our own AI sort of domestic kind of capacity to commercialize some of this technology? What's the R&D strategy internally? The sort of build out of the local sort of Canadian industries. I think I don't have a clear sense of what is a priority other than oil and gas for the most part. And even the auto sector seems to be sort of in this strange sort of abeyance period right now. So I agree with you. I think interprovincial trade has sort of been forgotten about a little bit, and I think part of it is it was politically useful at the time of the campaign, But it's actually very complicated now to sort of adjudicate the details.
It's a very technical issue.
It is, yes, yeah, absolutely, and maybe that's part of it. Yeah. And the sort of direction of the winds have changed, and Kuzma sort of taking up a lot of oxygen. I get that, and some of these deals with India and so on are sort of very flashy, but I think the domestic strategy needs to be built out, or else we are going to again be at the whim of some other economy.
Yeah, I know. I totally agree. And it feels also, that we're doing that at the expense of solving some problems that, like when you talk about like where are our super, like I love the idea of like going back to the supercluster program as a for instance, but this notion of mobilizing around some key issue, whether you want to call it the supercluster or not, but like some form of saying, look, this is the issue, and we're going to put energy into it. We have some real crises right now that feel like they're being ignored that could be addressed through domestic industrial policy, such as affordability in housing, for instance. Right? We don't have a strategy there that is delivering the housing that our communities need, excuse me, at an affordability that families and individuals here can get into that market, whether it be as a renter or be as an owner. If we wanted to create a domestic strategy for our economy, there are some very crisis level issues right now to start from. It's not like we don't know where to begin. We absolutely could start around things like transit. We absolutely could start around things like AI. But the reality is there's some day-to-day affordability issues right now that require mobilization of public resources to address that. You could be the foundation of an economic strategy domestically that I think we're overlooking right now at the expense of some of these other ones that are more global in nature. And again, this brings back my frustration of why are we not, to your point, it may have just been political convenience at the time, but I bought into a year ago the notion that we could internally also mobilize some of our resources and ingenuity and know-how to start creating opportunities within Canada, not just in our trade relationships outside of Canada.
Absolutely, I bought into it too, and the sort of number one piece of advice that I'm getting from, in particular, liberal strategists themselves is either outright abandon some of our advocacy around affordable housing and public transit, or try to rework them to be in the parlance of the economy or defense.
Sure.
And to me, it's like this is kind of, I roll my eyes thinking about this, because what better way to build up our economic capacity, our internal economic capacity, than to invest in the infrastructure needed to help folks live in the communities that they work in, and to get to work through a method of transportation that doesn't exacerbate congestion. Right, the Toronto Region Board of Trade unveiled last year this bombshell report on the productivity losses that come from congestion. And to me, the idea that we almost have to kind of, it felt for a moment that everyone was aligned on the importance of investing in affordable housing and in public transit. And it feels like we're starting from zero again to try and communicate this idea of, no, this stuff is important, and this is actually nation-building infrastructure. Yeah. But anyway.
Yeah, and I always find it funny when we have these conversations and they sort of get stalled because they feel like these are big. This is big government stuff. Yeah. But our premier, we use him as an example. The number one thing Doug Ford likes to argue for when he makes the argument for small government is what we want is for people to have more money in their pockets at the end of the day. And his basic economic strategy is built around this idea that if people in Ontario have more discretionary income, that they will spend that money into the economy, and that will further, therefore, create a virtuous cycle that will move our economy forward.
Yes.
So if that's the basic premise, then these, I know it offends the notion of government spend, but this is exactly why you should be spending that government money, those resources, to give us the opportunity to have affordability in our lives. And I'll give Doug Ford that then. Then you will have more disposable income that I will therefore use to buy a new car or buy a bigger house or do whatever it is that moves our economy forward. But so long as I'm tied and fearful about my capacity to meet my basic living expenses, I'm not in a position to do anything, let alone take a risk and start a business or invest in some large way. I can barely do the little things.
Yes.
And I think we're just missing how critical some of those investments could be to moving the economy forward. And it just frustrates me that, not that we're focusing externally, we have to, but that it's come at the expense of any kind of internal focus here. And to me, the interprovincial trade piece is not the thing, it's a symptom of a bigger perspective, as you're describing it, of an abandonment of a domestic industrial strategy here.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So that's certainly something I think we need to be thinking about. Like we sort of framed this podcast and like, what are the issues we're thinking about, for the coming months. Yeah. So certainly defense. We'll have Minister McGuinty here, talking about India. We have some of our trade network is going to be active, including we have a meeting, an event with the Indian Consul General, talking about that trade deal and what we think it means for India-Canada relations later this month. That's on the 26th.
Yes.
In terms of talking about this domestic strategy and where we're going with that, I think that's going to be a big part of the conversations we're having with our members and particularly on the automotive side and the housing side. And we've got some of the housing events conversations coming up as well. Do you want to talk at all about those?
Yeah. So we have an event on March 24th, a live podcast, as we mentioned, with the co-editors of a book called Messy Cities. And the topic of this is we'll be exploring the ways in which cities are built through these informal mechanisms and sort of the natural kind of gathering points of society and what can be learned from what people do anyway, sort of the paths of desired paths. So we'll be discussing with them sort of how this applies to Brampton and how we can envision our city in a way that sort of is true to the messy urbanism that has defined our city in these really wonderful ways. But we can also incorporate some of the needed infrastructure, the needed density that accommodates our growing population and in growing industrial and commercial composition when we're talking about employment lands and these sorts of things.
Right.
That'll take place on March 24th at 5:30 at Beehive. And really excited for that. And then in September, we have our annual Housing and Transportation Symposium, Brampton in Motion.
Yeah. So lots of fun stuff coming on those levels as well. So we've talked about a little bit of global. We talked a little bit about national. Let's talk a little bit about regional.
Yes.
So as I shared at the onset, we've had a focus on the implications of some of the decisions being made at the provincial level, particularly as it pertained to development charges and what that meant for the municipal budget. And long story short, the city is no longer collecting development charges on new builds, and that resulted in some of the unforeseen at the time, because this Bill 60 came up without a lot of warning to the municipalities that they were going to lose an important revenue stream.
Yes.
Now, and as a result, resulted in some projects, capital projects at the city being put on pause until City Council identified, whether it be through some other funding mechanisms through the province or whether through the use of reserves or some other means. We could always put a levy, I suppose, in place to find ways to fund some of these projects. The ones that drew our attention were transit related. There were a number that were related to rec centers and so forth. The city found some of that money. I think that was some of the $4.1 million spend that they got at the end to balance out the budget. Some of those dollars were allocated to some of these projects, but a number of those projects are sort of sitting on pause as well. So that's kind of where it was at the city level. But you've had some conversations recently with folks that have led us to understand that there are implications at the regional level as well, which makes sense. We just haven't talked about them yet.
Yeah. So we're part of two municipalities in Brampton. We're part of the lower tier municipality of Brampton and the upper tier municipality of Peel. Yeah. And in the same way that Bill 60 applies just as much to Peel region as it does to Brampton. So that being said, because development charges aren't being collected at the beginning of a project, instead at occupancy, and because the market is where it's at, $0 are also being collected at the regional level. No, well, I should say they're anticipating a steep decline in the development charges that they'll be collecting at the regional level.
We'll just take a pause. Let's just explain that one for a second, because that merits some explanation there. Yeah. So why is the economy affecting that? So typically development charges. So these are the fees that developers have to pay to the city at the time that a project, it used to be at the time that a project was started. Yeah. And these are the dollars that are allocated toward the infrastructure around the project. So the sewers, the libraries, the schools, all that sort of stuff came about through these development charges. Basically understanding that the municipality had to put in place a framework to allow these developments, whether it be homes or industrial, to be successful. It used to be that the developers paid those fees at the onset of the project. So the day that I basically signed the paper with the city that I'm purchasing this land and I'm zoning it for this and I'm going to begin a project, I have to pay these fees. And that the city collected those dollars and then utilized those dollars in the manner that we're describing. Yeah. It became very cumbersome for developers, however, because they're paying those dollars on day one. Now, once they pay those, they have to go through all these processes of site assessments, delivering plans, building the project, selling these units, and individuals taking occupancy. And that cycle could take years. And so in the meantime, the city had the money the developers had paid. And the developers, in some cases, were having to finance their ability to pay that money. So they may even be paying interest on those payments that they have made to the city. Yeah. And so the perception was that this was actually dissuading developers from starting projects because it was just too front and expensive to do so.
That's right.
So the notion was to say, well, what if we moved the DC collection to the end of the project at the time of occupancy? So at least it made it more affordable for developers to get the project started, and they didn't have to pay the money to the city until they were closer to the end of the project. This all kind of makes some sense if you believe that development charges were in fact the thing that were most cumbersome for developers in influencing whether projects got off the ground or they didn't. I think in our understanding and talking to people in that industry, development charges are a factor, but far from the biggest factor. Things like the cost of labor, the cost of materials, and a whole bunch of other things contribute just as much, if not more so, to why projects cost what they do and to the amount of risk that developers are willing to take on. Yep. But this was a hope that through the deferral of development charges, that developers would work more aggressively in our communities, and maybe we might even find some cost savings that made projects a little more affordable at the end user. Highly debatable, but this was the thinking.
Yeah.
So why does this matter now? Well, if you're deferring development charges to the end of the project, the issue is that if you sell, as you're seeing in the market right now, condos being built, but condos not being sold, no occupancy, well, the developer may even have started the project, but they may be sitting on that project now, waiting for that land to develop that land later because they don't have confidence they're going to be able to sell the unit.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like your worst case scenario has now happened, where the developer has purchased the land, but they're parked on it. So there is no opportunity for anyone to develop that property, nor is there any timeline on when those development charges are going to be collected.
The market's in free fall,
And that's what's tied the hands of the municipalities now, is to say, we can't do anything with this land because people are squatting on it. That's probably an unfair characterization. They've purchased land, but they're not prepared to develop it. And yet we have no capacity, no mechanism by which to collect money either. And no foreseeable timeline because we've left it now open to the free market to say, we're going to develop this land when we're good and ready, meaning we need the economy to turn around. And so we've created this terrible cycle. Anyway, I just want to explain that out, because I just think it's worth understanding why the market matters. It's not just we're going to collect it on a later day.
No, I appreciate that. Exactly. And the other piece too is, in addition to development charges, cost of labor, cost of goods, all those things, co-location with important pieces of infrastructure like 2A All Day Go, like in Vaughn's case, the TTC subway. Predictable transit is it allows for there to be parking minimums and the density that is necessary to be able to utilize that piece of infrastructure, and also incentivize those units to be sold. So all of this kind of goes into the calculation to evaluate whether a project pencils out. And Brampton is kind of in a state of want when it comes to some of these big infrastructure pieces. So as I was mentioning, thank you for that explanation. Bill 60, the deferral of development charges, of course affects Brampton, and they have decided to pause a number of capital projects. The same piece of legislation applies to the region, and they are now discussing, because they're anticipating a steep decline in the collection of development charges, they are also anticipating having to pause certain capital projects on their list. a lot of those capital projects, sewer build-outs, all of that, Mississauga is built out more or less already. There's infill development happening to be sure, but a lot of the new capital investment is really happening in Brampton and Caledon. So the pausing of those projects really affect us and Caledon, and so that piece has been of interest to me a little bit, especially when it comes to some of our provincial advocacy and looking at making municipalities whole and fair share for Peel and all of these things that are necessary, so that if you want to incentivize the market by providing some of these DC deferrals and freezes and whatnot, also provide some recompense to municipalities themselves so they can go about planning and executing needed infrastructure without having to be at the whim of the market. Just sort of really quickly, another story that I think is very relevant and interesting is in Burlington, where they are exploring a 2-year DC freeze for all new development. They acknowledge, their council acknowledges that DCs are important for us to this growth pace for growth kind of model. DCs are important to help build out the infrastructure that's necessary for an increase in the population. Fair. But if you don't have any development, then it doesn't matter when the DCs are being paid. You don't have any development. So at least try to incentivize development so that you can get the property taxes from those from that infrastructure. So Burlington's really led the way in a lot of the DC conversation. I think it's fair to say the city of Brampton is exploring further incentives. Councillor Peleschi did put forward a motion for staff to study other ways to incentivize the market. So we'll see what comes out of that. But yeah, also looking at the what's going on at the regional level to see, okay, well, what's going to be the result of some of these discussions.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot more to play out there.
Yeah.
And again, so where does this connect back to what we're doing in the coming weeks and months?
Yeah.
We got our State of the Region event
Yes.
coming up in early June, and that's our annual sort of conversation with folks across the region, so leadership at the region of Peel, as well as representation from Brampton, Mississauga, and Caledon, where we talk about sort of these larger economic, but also social and community issues. So I think I think it's an opportunity for you and I and our Policy and Government Relations Committee, to dig into what some of these implications are. But I definitely see some advocacy opportunities for us here, alongside our other partners at the regional level and across the municipalities, as we bring these issues collectively and then to the province. Because to your point, there's two ways forward. One is and it could be a combination of the two. One is what are we doing as a local strategy, in a la what Burlington's doing, but also, and I know we've had conversations like this with other folks as well. Is there an advocacy opportunity to the province to say, look, if you're going to take away this mechanism for funding, there's got to be some type of, and then fill in the blank, transitional or other sets of resources out there that allow the cities to operate in a fiscally responsible manner because they're getting the appropriate supports from the province, if we're going to go forward with the deferral of DC charges.
Absolutely. And I'll also be watching what's happening in Niagara. I think that's going to be of interest to us, partly because Niagara region is, from a population perspective, the size of Hamilton. Geographically, it's massive. It's about, I think, 12 different municipalities, and there are over 100 different elected officials of some sort. And so there's been a lot of energy around consolidating and if not creating one municipality, maybe 4.
Yeah, I hear 3, something like that. Yeah, Niagara on the lake sort of become one. I think St. Catharines becomes a hub.
Yes.
And then I think there's a third hub somewhere. I think around Thorold or something in there. But it feels like 2 to 3 hubs coming together now.
Yeah. So they're looking at a governance review, and this sort of is reminiscent of our conversations about the situation with Peel broadly around dissolution and amalgamation versus 3 separate cities. And it'll be interesting because I think there is really a renewed energy around municipal governance, fiscal autonomy for municipalities. Do we have the resources we need to be able to manage the growing list of demands that municipalities have? We talked about the federal government at the beginning of this episode. there's been another level of downloading through asylum seekers and providing the necessary wraparound supports for some of the most vulnerable in our community who are fleeing violence and persecution from other countries. And as a way to sort of manage the operational budgets of the federal government, there's been a downloading onto another level of government.
Yes, right.
So the taxpayer isn't really off the hook. It's just So yeah. Anyway, watching all of those things.
And do remind me, because I haven't been following this story in Niagara region closely enough, obviously, to know to set up some of the cities I know that have been impacted. Yeah. But do tell me, because I have been following closely. Yeah. Is this I don't get this. Is this initiative coming from the municipalities? I know there have been some councillors in those Niagara regions who've been asking for this. But my understanding is this is more the province is imposing this notion on the municipalities. Yeah. What's the actual truth here?
My understanding is that this first came about from the chair of
the regional chair.
Yeah, the regional chair. I think that the chair has changed his stance now. I think at one point he was talking about full amalgamation. Yeah. Now they're looking at an overall governance review, seeing what can be downloaded, uploaded, that sort of thing. But I think, the province, to your point, is very keen on finding efficiencies in some capacity, and that's sort of been the tenor of the conversation. I imagine the change in the chair's position is probably a result of some of the discussions with the province themselves. So, yeah.
Interesting. Okay, and something to follow. And we, as to your point earlier, we have a regional strata here as well, and we've seen lots of weirdness. A point of view taken by the province, backing off that point of view, but still now, some downloading of stuff from the region to the municipalities. So our own Peel region is somewhat in flux. I think without a clear, maybe to others who are working that, but at least to me as a layperson, I don't feel like there's necessarily a clear strategy or line of sight as to what the final version of Region of Peel looks like and Peel region looks like. So something perhaps to study in what's happening in Niagara region there as well. Because if there is some best practice that comes out from that, then it may have implications to places like Durham, York, and Peel also that have regional governments.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, and then the last thing we want to talk about is a little more local, and that was the notion of safety in our community in general. Yeah. And I don't know if you want to kick that one off, or shall I?
Maybe you should. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Yeah. And this is it's early. Yeah. Like I think everything else we've talked about, we're just sort of seeing what's happening out there, trying to figure out what it means, and where does that fit into the activity at the Board of Trade, whether it be in programming or conversations we're having. And this is very much, this is an issue that's been around a little bit longer, but it kind of bubbles up and down, and that is of violence and safety, issues of safety in our community driven by violence, primarily driven by extortions within the business community. And this is something that's been going on for a couple of years, and it's had ebbs and flows. But these are businesses who are being targeted for basically exactly what you're describing, or what you'd imagine rather.
Yes.
There's people getting threatening messages through WhatsApp or some other means, letting them know that if they're not prepared to pay, that they're going to have their businesses attacked. And there's been some shooting up of businesses. Some of that violence has actually gone into people's personal lives, where they've been shooting up the homes of these business owners. Yeah. And it's largely been threats at this level and damage to property. Yes. Although I understand, I've had some conversations with Peel Regional Police to understand the extent of this issue, and there have been a couple of individuals who there has been personal injury that they connect back to this, but it's primarily been focused around property damage at this point in time. But there is a threat out there, and it feels like there's a few layers that need to be pulled back. Some of it feels like it is it is organized crime, where there is a real targeting of specific businesses by bad actors. Some of it feels like there's a copycat out there as well, because we're now in an environment where this is happening, and others are following suit and saying, well, maybe I can make a quick buck here as well. And so I think there's some complexity for the police in terms of how they respond to this, because there's an organized crime element, and then I think it feels like there's an opportunistic crime element as well. Yes. This is something that's definitely been on the radar of our elected leaders. The city has been part of a larger extortion task force as well that's brought together policing at multiple levels, as well as city officials and those at the province, to try to identify sort of a response piece here. And I'm just sort of bringing it up in the context of, I do think there's a role for organizations like ours to play in educating businesses and hopefully finding opportunities to create better communication between the business community and policing on what response should be. And so I'm just kind of bringing this forward as a very emerging topic for the Board of Trade, something that's been going on in our community for a while. And among the reasons it's being taken so seriously is not for the obvious, just the criminality and safety piece, but we have a sister community in Surrey, BC, that in many ways has similar demographics, similar composition industrially to Brampton, that is going through an arc of this as well.
And they're kind of a few steps ahead in some ways,
Precisely, and this is, I think, where people are being very vigilant as to what's happening in Brampton. Because in Surrey's case, it actually got quite bad, and it seems to be it's starting to take a bit of a turn for the better, driven by community consultation and businesses feeling more comfortable speaking up. And I think officials here are looking at what happened in Surrey and are fearful that they want to prevent that it doesn't get as bad as it got in Surrey, but also recognizing that the way that Surrey moved forward was through community coming together. And so the notion now of, okay, how do we get ahead of that so we don't get to the same depths that Surrey unfortunately had to get to? Can we also do so through community consultation and collaboration as well? And that's where we've been increasingly having conversation with, like I said, Peel Regional Police and others. And I'm just trying to figure out, where our role is going to be toward convening some of these conversations that I think are really important going forward. A lot of this has been targeted businesses in the South Asian community and specifically the Punjabi community. So it's been somewhat contained. It's also been focusing on businesses in certain sectors, trucking, hospitality. So I think it doesn't feel like it's as widespread across the city of Brampton. It's not touching everyone's lives. But the fact of the matter is that even if a concentrated element, if it's happening, we have an obligation toward those businesses, but there's nothing to prevent it from spreading further. And so all the more reason to try to contain it right now. If it's within a certain community, a certain sector of our businesses, let's respond there. But there's no reason this couldn't become a citywide issue if we're not vigilant. And that's why I'm bringing it up as something I think we need to be talking a little bit more openly about.
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting to me about this is that there's a bit of a Robin Hood element to this issue as well, where there is this perception that the extortions are being done, at least in some cases, they're being done sort of by people who have been wronged or on behalf of employees who have been wronged at the hands of nefarious employers. And so there's this real perception challenge where not only is the extortion in and of itself a problem, but being sort of publicized as the recipient of this extortion is kind of a reputational liability.
Absolutely. I mean, part of the reason I'm talking about this is because businesses come to me and raise the issue, and everyone's just looking for more information. And what you're describing is 100% a thing that's happening. I know businesses who are afraid of being targeted because of the risks associated with being targeted. And I know businesses who come to me and said, I'm afraid of being targeted because of the reputational damage that will be that I may have to go through if people think I'm one of these bad people and was targeted for those reasons.
That's right.
So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's operating on two levels now, where some are less worried about the extortion element and more so worried about having to wear the scarlet letter of being a business that was targeted for extortion. So on either level, it's still an issue that needs to be addressed. So again, really early days. I don't even know 100% what our strategic approach is going to be at the Board of Trade, but I think the more we're talking about this issue, the better it is for everybody, because it's only going to get solved through communication and collaboration.
Completely.
So that was kind of like the big topics for now. Maybe not a lot of conclusions, but some more provocations and letting folks know the kinds of things that you and I are thinking about right now and how we're processing what's going on in the world as we try to shape it into policy conversations and events and deeper conversations at the Board of Trade. I think that's a worthwhile discussion to have for a podcast.
That was great. Yeah, excellent. And like all our podcasts, we usually end with a piece of media.
I am really struggling because I have been so head down and working. Normally, I've gone some, but anything I've been watching has been pure escapism TV.
That's fair.
Which is very little. But I've been watching a lot of basketball. I realize. Because I can have it on the background while I'm working. And I've been watching a little bit of Disney Plus. I've been watching Wonder Man. The new Disney Marvel show. It's great. It's like a meta commentary on superheroes, which I really like. But I wish I had something more profound to say. But I think I've just been so in my head with work lately that it's been just escapism for me. And I'm really excited for the NBA playoffs coming up. We're in the home stretch, 20 games to go. The Raptors are looking like they're on very thin ice here. We're in danger of dropping down into the play-in. But beyond that, I don't have a lot to say about what's going on in the world that's not related to work right now. I feel like I've let you down here.
No, all good, all good. No, I think that's great. I've been watching a lot of Smallville, so there's a sort of a
excellent.
Yeah, I've been rewatching it. Haven't watched it for a while. But maybe we can chat a little bit about Inspire just briefly.
I'd love that. What will you lead off? What were your observations?
That was great. I mean, it's probably the one event that feels the best that we do. I mean, like the BEAs is great as well. That's very celebratory. But Inspire, I think, is inspiring. And there was a great auctioneer who really hyped up the crowd, and it was excellent. Like that's it really.
It's our annual Women's Day gala, and we celebrate women in leadership roles in our community. And among the highlights of the event, but the standard every year is the recognition through the Naseem Samani Award, which recognizes a woman for her contributions to our community, named in honor of the former CEO of Dynacare, and who herself was a trailblazer both as a South Asian, as an executive, a South Asian in the healthcare sector, as a woman in the healthcare sector. Naseem embodied a lot of important things, and Dynacare and the Board of Trade have been entrusted with preserving her legacy through this award. And I love the Inspire Her event for a bunch of reasons. And some we just described. Great energy, it's a super fun event, it's always really well done. Our team here, led by Sonia and Brianna, did a masterful job of pulling that together. But the thing I like best about that event, in my mind, is we talk a lot about the community-driven purpose behind our actions at the Board of Trade. That to do and advocate for the things that we do and advocate for purely for economic development reasons are not sufficient. You have to do it because we want a better Brampton. We aspire for something for our community. And oftentimes we don't get to do that second part in full. It's sort of the implicit understanding of here's the why, but we are still having conversations around tariffs and trade and things of that nature. And for good reason. That is our jobs to do that. I'm not shirking that responsibility. But it is nice to have a couple of events that we have per year. This one, I think the Cities We Deserve is going to be another one in a couple of weeks, where the focus is purely on that second half. It's purely around community. And the stories we tell, the people we celebrate, the authors and editors that we're bringing in, it's purely around what can an amazing functioning Brampton look like? What are the amazing things that are happening in our city right now? In the case of Inspire, in a community that so often we struggle to change narratives about our city and have these negative perceptions challenged, to be able to tell the story of 10 amazing women who were nominated for these awards for the great work that they're doing to change this community for the better is not just a privilege, it's an important thing that we get to be able to be part of. And so for me, I love that event and events like Cities We Deserve are coming up because it really allows us to lean all the way into the why, not just the what we do, by being able to tell those stories and really celebrate the best of Brampton without any apology or any need to have a conversation around the economy that day. This is about great people doing great work, and I love that event for that reason.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's great, and I similarly felt the same way at the event, and in particular Angela's closing keynote, Angela Carter. It was incredibly inspiring, and it reminded us why we do the work that we do as well. For me, a piece of media that I thought was worth sharing is this very short CBC documentary on the ketchup wars in Leamington. And Heinz was a longtime employer in that community.
That's right.
And when Warren Buffett took over a majority share of that company, I guess Leamington was on the chopping block for that organization, and they sort of consolidated all of their supply chain within the United States. There were a bunch of layoffs and people with a particular set of skills who've been in that community working in this way for several decades.
Yeah.
And that was the impetus for French's
Yeah.
to come in and then and utilize that the same plant and the same workers to produce their own brand of ketchup. And this I forget the individual's name, but this one individual living in, I think, in Windsor, I think posted to Facebook during the peak of social media, when it was actually, it felt good to utilize, posted that he was in fact using French's ketchup because it was it supported Canadian jobs.
Right.
And that he would not be purchasing Heinz going forward, that it would be only French's. That went viral.
I recall this. I do actually remember this. Now you bring it up.
Yeah. And then there was this whole debate online before the whole Trump thing and before the whole Buy Canadian imperative was a thing. There was this debate around French's or Heinz, right? And which country are you therefore supporting? And then Heinz came back to the community and all of that in a modest way. And I don't know, I just started thinking, what that made me reflect on is, number one, our community, and I'm thinking about, Stellantis and a few other organizations that have historical ties to the community and what that means for the community. But it also made me think, there was this one civilian person who shared this post and this desire to support a Canadian, what he felt wasn't a Canadian product, but supported Canada in a meaningful way. And this became sort of this rallying cry.
The whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that was kind of nice and wholesome. But
I like that. I'll check that out. That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, so maybe we'll wrap up here. I think we went just over an hour already. But I want to do one last plug. So this was episode 24.
Yeah.
And so we've been at this for over a year now. Thank you I know people who've been listening to it since the very beginning. And we want to do something fun for episode 25. I know we've touched on it a couple times, but how about we do just one more full, what are we doing on the 24th of March?
Yes, so for episode 25, to sort of celebrate the year of doing this podcast, we're doing a special live podcast event where Jaipaul and I will be obviously recording this podcast, but adding an element of pontification about the city of Brampton, where it could go, where we've been, and we'll be doing so with the co-editors of Messy Cities, which is a book all about messy urbanism around the world, and we'll be applying some of those lessons to Brampton. It's at 5:30 p.m. At Beehive in downtown Brampton on the 24th. If you haven't registered already, please do so. It's on our event calendar on our website. And I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be great.
And for those who, because I know we have listenership who's not from Brampton, we have timed this event to coincide with the GO train schedule.
That's right, yes. So the venue is quite literally beside the GO station, Brampton Innovation District GO. It's accessible on the Kitchener line that departs from either Union Station, Bloor GO, Weston, Mount Dennis. And we've timed it in such a way that, because we don't have two-way all-day GO, we've timed it in such a way where the event will end before a train goes back to Toronto. So if you're coming from Toronto, you can utilize the GO train.
Excellent. Yeah. So if you're able to come out, we'd love to have you. I think this could be a really fun exercise for us. I think one of the most unexpected but pleasant things about doing this podcast is the people who we run into, who we find out listen to this podcast. Yeah. So if you're one of those people, come out. I would love to meet more people who listen to this podcast,
Absolutely.
Hear your feedback, tell us how we can make it better.
Yeah.
But more than anything, it's an opportunity to meet other people who listen to this podcast and know that you're not alone.
Yes,
so
that's it.
We'd appreciate anyone who wants to join us. And we have both read the book. I'm actually in the process, media thing. The only thing I am reading right now is I'm rereading Messy Cities right now in preparation for the podcast. And and the book is excellent.
Yes.
And we will have copies of the book available that evening as well.
Yes.
So come out. These are brilliant people. It's going to be an amazing conversation. And we'll have snacks. You have an opportunity to meet me and Vijay and you meet other cool people. So definitely come out.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right.
And with that, we'll see you hopefully live in a couple of weeks.